Hello, AAPOR. It is a real pleasure for me to be introducing AAPOR's 73rd president, Nora Kate Schaeffer, for her presidential address. Prior to serving with Nora Kate this year on AAPOR Council, I, of course, knew her from meeting her at AAPOR conferences over the years, but I've gotten to know her a lot better over the past year through our council meetings, weekly conference calls, and frequent emails. Like many of you, I had always known her simply as Nora Kate, but was pleased last year when she told me I could just call her Nora. My impression of Nora before getting to know her was that she is a very serious person. And now that I've gotten to know her better in the last year, I would say that she is indeed a very serious person. But beyond that, I've gotten to know her as a kind, generous, and warm person. Many AAPOR members know of Nora through her scholarship and her numerous professional accomplishments. Nora has been professor of sociology at the University of Wisconsin and also the faculty director of the University Survey Center. She's published over 60 research articles and has authored over 80 conference papers, including important work on interaction in the survey interview, as well as question design. But beyond all this professional success, who is Nora Kate Schaeffer? From some of her family and friends, I've learned that Nora was raised in an intellectual Catholic family. She was the second oldest of 6 children and the oldest daughter. She was described to me as being somewhat shy and very polite, and as someone who always felt great loyalty to the family. During her high school years, Nora's family moved from a rural area of St. Louis County into the central city near St. Louis University, where her mother and father both had taught. Her family was one of the first tenants of Laclede Town, a new experimental federally funded housing development that was known for its diversity and active arts community. One of Nora's favorite activities growing up was roller skating. And according to Nora's sister Monica, Nora was simply dominant on roller skates. Nora was independent at an early age and supported herself financially from high school through college and graduate school with jobs such as meal server, dishwasher, cook, and switchboard operator. But of course, Nora was never far from a pile of books. She always took her schoolwork very seriously and worked incredibly hard. She graduated from Rosati Kane High School, a Catholic all-girls school in St. Louis. And after that, she received her bachelor's degree in anthropology from Washington University in St. Louis, followed by a master's degree and PhD from the University of Chicago. But by all accounts, the greatest joy in Nora's life is her daughter Emma, who Nora adopted in 1996. Nora and Emma are very close, and one friend described them to me as being 2 peas in a pod. I think that these 2 photos of them, then and now, say it all. Emma sent me some of Nora's favorite sayings that Nora uses around the house, one of which I've also heard Nora use on more than one occasion, and I also saw Nora post it on her Facebook page this year. And that saying is, I can't work more than all the time. Last year, when I began working with Nora on AAPOR Council, it quickly became clear to me what a strong work ethic she has and what a perfectionist she is. One of Nora's colleagues described her as someone who loves to get things exactly right. Each month, Microsoft Outlook sends me a report called My Analytics, which provides an analysis of my email and my meeting schedule for that month. And right away, and for many months during the last year, My Analytics described or designated Nora as what it calls my top collaborator. It defines top collaborator as your contact with whom you've spent the most time in the last month. That's based on the number of emails and scheduled meetings. I decided to dig a little deeper to see what that looked like in terms of email communications from Nora. I searched my inbox for emails from Nora in the past year, and indeed she was quite prolific. I received 1,587 emails from Nora in the past year. Looking at it by month, we see that Nora's email frequency increased near the end of the year and then increased even more starting in January 2020, reaching a high point of 236 emails for the month of March, when I received an average of about 8 emails a day from Nora. Of course, March was a particularly busy month for Council with the onset of the coronavirus and discussions about what should be done about the annual conference. Looking at Nora's emails to me by day of week, we can see that Nora worked 7 days a week for AAPOR, but that she typically started the weeks out kind of slowly on Sundays, but then picked up steam quickly with her email output peaking on Wednesdays. I also had a conference call with Nora every Wednesday at noon, so between all of her Wednesday emails and our conference calls, I affectionately began to call Wednesdays Nora Day. Using the number of emails I received from Nora as an indicator of her efforts on AAPOR's behalf, we have to conclude that she worked very hard for us 7 days a week. And again, note that these are only emails that I received from Nora, certainly with 15 other council members, as well as numerous AAPOR staff members. Nora's AAPOR email output was exponentially higher. Something that I also started to notice in Nora's emails early on was her relatively frequent use of the word ARG. That was a new one for me, so I Googled it to see what I could learn. And the first thing I learned is that the word ARG is closely tied to the lexicon of pirates. In my research about Nora's background, there was nothing suggesting that she was a descendant of pirates or even a pirate aficionado. But as I was going down various rabbit holes on Google, I stumbled upon this photo of Nora, and things became a bit more clear. Over the last year, I received 80 emails from Nora that contained some variant of the word ARG. And in 13% of these emails, the word ARG was used more than once. As you can see, the frequency of these ARG emails increased at the beginning of 2020 as things became even busier for Council. Content analyzing these emails, it became clear that Nora's use of the word ARG often represented some amount of anguish, with the level of anguish being distinguishable by the spelling of ARG and the number of exclamation points that followed it. Analyzing this further, I was able to characterize Nora's ARGs by level of severity in what I call the Nora-Kate argometer. The most severe level of anguish occurs when ARG is spelled with 3 A's, with the highest level reserved for ARGs with 3 A's and an exclamation mark. Fortunately, there were not many emails from Nora in this high severity range. These were followed on the seriousness scale by an email on November 18th, where Nora simply wrote out the words many ARGs, and an email on April 22nd that said double ARG. But these spelled ARG with 2 A's, which of course is not as serious as the ARGs spelled with 3 A's. In fact, the vast majority of ARGs were spelled with 2 A's, and most of these were without an exclamation mark. So fortunately, all of these fall near the low end of the ARG severity scale. And at the very bottom of the argometer, you will see one parenthetical ARG and one ARG that is missing the letter G. More of an R than an ARG, but the meaning was clear. But no ARGs about it. I can honestly say that I've really enjoyed working closely with Nora in the last year and want to thank Nora for her strong leadership on behalf of AAPOR. She led us through a particularly challenging year on Council, and I'm now looking forward to her presidential address. AAPOR, here is Nora Kate Schaeffer.
Good morning. I'll begin by saying that it is extremely frustrating not to be able to react to Dan's introduction. As I'm recording this, I have no idea what Dan just said. This, of course, is driving me crazy, but I hope that you will imagine that I just made a perfect retort. Perfect is pretty much the perfect word for Dan, who is himself a perfect fit for AAPOR presidency at this moment in time. Dan's past experience on Council, his calm in the face of crises, willingness to make difficult decisions, and stature in the field will all serve AAPOR well. Working with Dan was one of the great privileges of being on Council. In a tense situation, he can take an action that is just right in a way that is so seamless you wonder if he did it on purpose. But he did. Dan, thank you. I'm looking forward to your presidency. And I hope that what I just said about you doesn't make you feel bad about what you just said about me, whatever it was. Before saying more, on behalf of all council, I thank you for supporting AAPOR by attending our virtual conference. The challenges of the last few months crept up on us slowly, but then they arrived in full force. In the face of constant uncertainty, we've been forced to make, each of us, we've been forced to make consequential decisions, and many of us have suffered. The events of the last few weeks have reminded us of the importance of surveys and research in helping us understand the world and giving people a voice. Against this backdrop, the ongoing generosity and dedication of our members, volunteers, and council are even more vivid. AAPOR had the benefit of an extraordinary council at an extraordinary time, and I'm grateful to have served with them. Finally, as the first AAPOR president to address you from home in a pre-recorded speech, welcome to my world. Please ignore the trains, emergency vehicles, backup beeping, squawking gulls, and I think even a motorcycle that might make walk-on appearances during my talk. Now to the address.
This year marks our 75th annual conference. Like the new year, a 75th anniversary is a transition that provides an occasion to reflect. When we look back, what did we learn? What have we overlooked? The addresses of past presidents provide a way to look back. Each address showcases concerns of their moment in time. This chart shows the results of a rough coding of the main themes of AAPOR's presidential addresses. Some presidents have focused on the role of AAPOR as an organization or issues facing the profession, such as the need for transparency and standards. Some face outward, for example, to consider the importance of public opinion in a democracy. There are discussions of methodological challenges and the quality of survey data, especially the impact of declining cooperation of sample members. Discussions of survey climate and participation have been the central topic of at least 8 presidential addresses and a secondary theme of at least 7 others. However, measurement is the principal focus of a handful of presidential addresses, and most of those discuss the measurement of attitudes. Some aspects of measurement have received almost no attention. These include interviewers, interviewing techniques, survey questions as a measurement tool, and what it is like to answer our questions. In other words, the infrastructure of measurement in surveys. Today, I will add one more tick on the bar for measurement. Although measurement has received relatively little attention in presidential addresses, diagnosing the sources of measurement error and reducing it are critical to the quality of survey estimates. We easily recognize measurement as one of the 2 main paths in designing a survey, as shown in this formulation by Groves and colleagues. Within these paths, a common comparison is between bias due to measurement and that due to non-response. Bias can be examined using record check studies that compare survey responses to external records, and so make it possible to assess the relative contributions of these 2 sources of bias. Several record check studies have concluded that measurement error can swamp non-response error. As an example, Taranjo and colleagues looked at bias in estimates of voting in 2004 based on self-reports. They concluded that for reports of voting, measurement bias is considerably larger than non-response bias, a pattern others have also found. Obviously, we cannot overgeneralize from such results. Nevertheless, results like these suggest that even our most sophisticated non-response adjustments may be compromised by measurement error. Furthermore, we are not routinely able to evaluate or estimate how compromised our adjustments are. The example I just summarized focused on bias. One consequence of random measurement error also deserves mention here. Random measurement errors inflate variance and make estimates less precise. When surveys are designed, question development and testing directly compete with sample size for a share of the budget. When we add cases, we can count them, but we cannot usually estimate how much development and testing increase reliability or decrease bias for even a single variable in a survey. Thus, an increase in sample size is easier to explain and justify, and may prevail in the competition for dollars. The source of random measurement error and bias is the basic building block of survey measurement, the question. In his presidential address, Howard Schuman commented that by and large, the survey questioner cannot depart too far from ordinary questioning, for the essential nature of the survey interview is communication with people who expect to hear ordinary questions. In other words, respondents come to the interview with conversational practices they have been using their whole lives. But we come to respondents with practices of standardization that regularly depart far from ordinary questioning. Even in a well-written and well-tested instrument, our questions may seem dry, formal, remote, and a bit tedious. In many instruments, however, our questions may be complex, confusing, indirect, irrelevant, poorly written, and presented in a haphazard way. As illustration, here is a fictitious question that preserves key features of some originals. The question projects yes or no as an answer, but those categories are not available. The response method is a slider with verbal scales that do not match the description of the scale. The labels span multiple categories and appear only at the endpoints. How do respondents receive these far from ordinary questions? To help, here is the familiar model of the response process. The model imagines 4 roughly sequential stages: comprehension, retrieval, judgment, and formatting an answer. The model presumes an ideal respondent. At each stage, this ideal respondent approaches our survey question with questions of their own. Do I understand the question? Can I remember the information requested? Is my answer good enough? Do I want to tell them my answer? Which option is the best fit for me? But what if instead of that ideal respondent, we have a real respondent? What does that real respondent think? When I was explaining what this slide should look like to my 25-year-old helper, she interrupted with, "Oh, I know. Who comes up with these questions? Why would I even know anything about this? This is so confusing. What is this even about? What does that word mean?" We can repeat the thought experiment at each stage. For retrieval, we have, do they really expect me to remember how many times I did that? Did they even try to answer these questions themselves? How could I possibly answer this question? For the stage of judgment, why do they need this information? This is just too much work. Why should I bother trying to figure this out? This is so boring. They are all the same. And finally, none of these categories fits me. What is supposed to be the difference between 2 and 3? So where am I supposed to put my answer? These are 2 very different views of the respondent's experience, and these respondents can be characterized in various ways. We might think of the ideal and the real respondents this way, or perhaps as the achiever and the lost soul. It is difficult to devise labels that do not privilege the researcher's point of view. From the respondent's point of view, the experiences might be described as getting it on the one hand and frustrated or disrespected on the other. Our more Bayesian respondents might estimate that they are being asked to spend more time on our questions than we did. As we know, respondents are almost by definition cooperative. They regularly manage to make enough sense of confusing questions that we can comfort ourselves that the questions work. Nevertheless, we can ask, how does the experience of answering one impossible, frustrating, confusing, irrelevant, or boring question after another affect the respondent's motivation? In other words, how might this situation be viewed by the respondent? As a field, we are used to thinking about the respondent's motivation before the interview, that is, motivation to participate. We think of there being a threshold that the sample member crosses on the way to becoming a respondent. Leverage saliency theory, for example, models a respondent who weighs the costs and benefits of participation before deciding to cross that threshold. Thus, as an independent variable, motivation is something that the sample member brings to the interview, and respondents probably begin with a disposition to help us. We can focus on the respondent's motivation to work for us as a dependent or an independent variable. The issue of this motivation was central to the work of Charlie Cannell and Robert Kahn over many years. In this model, they considered the respondent's motivation as a dependent variable and identify factors that might increase or decrease the likelihood that the respondent will provide complete and accurate information. Only one factor they list, just like for interview content, is internal to the interview. Vil Dijkstra and Hans van der Zouwen also gave considerable thought to the respondent's motivation, and they included both influences on motivation and motivation's effect on accuracy, but their model focused on the role of the interviewer rather than on the role of features of the task. Motivation appears more recently in the model of survey satisficing, which hypothesizes conditions under which respondents might take shortcuts in answering. Respondents are less likely to work hard for us if the task is difficult, their ability to perform the task is low, or they are not motivated to do so. In most studies, we cannot select respondents for how well our tasks fit their aptitudes, but we can assess broadly how some components of these models might fit together, and which factors we control that we might use to improve measurement. In particular, we can consider how the intersection of the difficulty of the task and the respondent's characteristics make the task more or less accessible for different groups within a population. If our questions turn respondents off, then we can ask ourselves which features of our questions do that, and how we might make our questions fit real respondents even a little better. Ideally, the process of designing survey questions and instruments benefits from the history of measurement in an area, but is not constrained by it. In an ideal process, we dedicate resources and use techniques of scholarship and science to bring substantive and methodological expertise to bear on the task of developing survey instruments. But in practice, we are chronically short of money, short of time, and short of staff. So when we need to make decisions quickly under stress, we take shortcuts. We borrow questions from other sources without investigating their origins. We claim authority for borrowed questions based on the stature of the source. We assert that we need to replicate the work of others in order to make comparisons that might or might not be key to our research question and that might or might not ever actually be made. We accept claims that measures we have adopted have been validated, without examining the basis for those claims. These shortcuts are understandable and reflect real constraints, but over time they ossify our practice, perpetuate bad models, and take us away from basing decisions on the science we do have. The scientific study of questions and measurement has advanced substantially over the last decades and given us starting points when we write questions. Of course, there is disagreement about some findings or the situations in which they can be applied. There are also important concerns about the strength and suitability of evidence, and recommendations based on past research only stand until they are replaced by stronger studies. Nevertheless, our analysis of question characteristics has steadily improved, so that we are better able to identify characteristics of questions and how they are related to each other, so that we can determine which characteristics matter for the quality of data. If we simultaneously build our understanding of the dimensions of task difficulty, we can begin to develop practices that broaden how accessible our questions are to all in our study populations. Some of the tasks we ask respondents to perform are inherently challenging, but we can work to make the questions that present the tasks clearer. Making our measurement procedures more accessible to respondents with a greater variety of aptitudes and backgrounds is important for a central goal of measurement, that the properties of our measurement procedure result in comparable measures across units. Measurement specialists have long puzzled over how to make the meaning of questions comparable for different social groups. But we have given less attention to developing questions that are equally accessible, equally engaging, and equally motivating. In other words, that are more comparable in task difficulty for respondents of all backgrounds, particularly for respondents who do not share our interests, privilege, abilities, education, and so forth. Obviously, the questions that our respondents find challenging come from us. we reuse and produce questions that fall short of our current standards because of very real constraints. However, we can recognize that these reasons also provide cover for a lack of commitment to consistently bringing the best science we have available to bear on measurement. With that in mind, here are 3 paths to consider for embedding such a commitment in our organizations and practice. Within our organizations, we could recognize that expertise and training in measurement are a thing and scientifically important. This would entail educating clients to recognize this also. We could require that specialists trained in research about measurement develop and review our survey instruments. Similarly, funding agencies could systematically assess technical expertise in instrument design and measurement, as well as substantive and statistical expertise in the award process. We could develop systems and infrastructure within our organizations to bring expert knowledge of the literature to bear on routine decisions about measurement. We can teach basic techniques for writing survey questions to the bench practitioners who craft questions for everyday research inquiries. Infrastructure can be compiled within organizations that disseminates knowledge. This would allow our mid-level professionals and practitioners to provide clients and researchers with evidence-based solutions. There are also implications for the way we develop instruments. We can take evidence-based recommendations for questions design seriously. This means giving up the sport of overriding evidence-based recommendations because they are not what we're used to. When we compare 2 approaches to a survey question, we can ask whether there is evidence that suggests one approach might have superior reliability or validity. We can ground those decisions that must go beyond the existing research in reasoned analogies and extensions from the research. We recognize that this sort of continuous improvement has costs, and we can prepare to explain the costs to clients. More development and testing require time and money, so some improvements will be incremental. In some cases, improvements mean giving up comparisons or validating new measures, investments that also require educating clients. We can accept that any concept, having a job, participating in the gig economy, anything, will turn out to be more complex than we initially expect it to be, and that measuring anything well takes time for development, time for testing, and time during the interview. We could give up the practice of counting questions. We would benefit by accepting that 2 or 3 and sometimes more questions that are straightforward and clear may take less time and obtain better quality data than a single question stuffed with conditions and complicated definitions. A question that must be reread by the respondent or interviewer is not one question. Finally, often our questions are our main point of contact with the respondent and a foundation of our relationship with them. Our questions shape what respondents think of us. They provide us a chance to treat our volunteers with respect. We could value good writing and recognize that it serves both respondents and measurement. Respondents value their time. They have other things to do than answer our questions, and they read quickly. Clear writing is respectful of respondents and their time. For each question in an instrument, we could consider the respondent's point of view. That is, we could practice do unto others in the context of measurement. This means asking ourselves, am I writing this question for the range of backgrounds in the target population? And how will this question affect the respondent's propensity to take this task seriously and work hard on the next question? None of these suggestions is fancy. Some of them take investment. Many are things that any of us could do, even at home. While we wait for more research with stronger criteria and better designs, we can improve the organizational aspects of our practice so that when that research arrives, its results will be applied for better understanding of the world. When I reread the addresses of past presidents, the voice I heard the least frequently was that of the respondent, upon whom our industry is built, and who, like the similarly absent interviewers, rarely get the appreciation they have earned. In 1991, I heard Joan Black's presidential address. Her observations about how to improve the experience of the respondent seemed to me at the time commonsensical and awkwardly simple. Black noted that if we spent more time observing and conducting interviews, we would have more innovative solutions to the problems caused by questionnaire design. Since I heard Black's address, I have listened to many more interviews. I can now better appreciate the practical wisdom of Black's observation. It is a mistake to let the exigencies of our practice take the place of actual goals. Instead, we could make more and more routine use of what we do know. Our current science will fail us at times, but by using the knowledge we do have to guide decisions in a variety of research contexts with different measurement goals, we learn where the gaps in our science are. But in the meantime, we can use the answers we do have while we fill in the gaps. Thank you.
Thank you again for attending. There's another day of excellent sessions ahead, and please join us at the end of the day for the business meeting where the committees who've been working hard for members all year will describe and summarize their accomplishments, and you'll get to meet the new council. I look forward to meeting you in person and seeing all of you again at another conference when we can be together safely. Thank you.